Today's program is a little bit different from what we've already done. We're doing the Unitarian Church, and I think everybody here probably knows that's the church on the hill. And we're going to call it an event, but an extended event. And you'll hear in the video when it all started. And the fact is that it continues today, and those of us that have worked on this project have become really enamored of the building, the sense of the building. And I'm speaking even for the likes of Shane, who spent a lot of time there. There's an architectural historian, Eric Godoya, who did some analysis on the building, and a framing expert also. And everybody is kind of fallen under the spell of what really is an amazing building here in town. What we're going to look at in this video is a general sort of overview of the building itself, which deals with architecture and how the building actually worked as a building, heating, cooling, those kinds of things. Yes, in the 1830s and 40s, they thought about those things. Probably particularly heating, but I don't think there was much chance of getting warm in the wintertime in the church. Let's see. And then the other part of that section, which is the video, is essentially the response. And George is going to be the main man on this, but he speaks so beautifully to the church, its history, and what it has meant to him personally. And I think that's really pretty critical. Why are we doing this with something as strange as a building and not just people and what have you? Well, it is people. But there are three reasons that we've just sort of settled on. One is to satisfy the grant, and Claire has already mentioned that it's the Association for Rural and Small Libraries who basically put the money up for us to be able to put this program together, and the other programs that we've done. Item number two, and it could easily be item number one, it's a great story. It's just fun. It was fun, and I think, again, I'm looking at Shane and a little bit at Ross over here, but Shane has spent a lot of time in the building, and the other people who have come to look at this building and to comment on it. And I hope that people here will get a chance, I believe, and I'm looking for tomorrow afternoon, the church will be open for, what have we got? I think from 2 to 4, the building will be open, and there will be people up there who can answer questions. And the final thing, as far as a reason for doing this project, is just sort of generally the future. And it's the future of that building. And there are all kinds of ideas. The selectmen are actually, where's David, have put their ears to this, and they're starting to listen and starting to think about a number of options, a number of technical aspects that have been gotten through. But we'll wait and see. So it's going to take time. So, what else? For today, let's see, checking my own notes here. As Claire has already outlined, we're going to show the movie or the film, and then that'll be the first part. And then at the end of that, we're going to get George and Arline are going to come up to the table here, and we're going to have questions, comments, hopefully not objects thrown at us, but we'd like everybody to really kind of get involved in it. People who have known the church or have wondered about it and have questions. And that's from everybody. And then, as Claire has already done, and we've already given them applause, but I can't say enough, the crew here that have done the video for us has really been phenomenal, both in terms of putting it together and then the whole editing piece has been wonderful. Thank you, Shane, in particular. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Shane, and we're going to dim the lights, and I'm going to get rid of this.
This is a story about the meeting house of the first parish of Warwick, Massachusetts. I have been handed record books of minutes of meetings for many, many years, and I have gone through these and spent hours looking for information which I want to relate for this video. This building was built in 1836 at a cost of $1,850 by a contractor by the name of Chapin Holden. After the building was put up, another $407 was spent on painting and the steeple and the bell tower. The clock was installed in 1884, a gift of Martha Clapp and her three sisters in memory of their mother, Mary Blake Clapp. The Barstow furnace was installed by Frost & Barnes Company of Athol, Mass. at a cost of $125. The original ceiling was plaster, just like the walls. In 1889, they voted to replaster it. In 1890, they had a vote to rescind that vote. I believe that's when the wood ceiling went up in 1891 at a cost of $257. At the same time, painting was done and papering for a total cost of $441. They slated the roof in 1896 for a cost of $185.20. The chandelier was a gift from the Northfield Unitarian Church in 1915. In 1921, the parish sold 3 acres of that 7 to the state to become part of Mount Grace Reservation. That money was put towards the purchase of the organ. That came from the Unitarian Church of Brattleboro, Vermont. The relettering of the clock faces was done in 1971 with the use of plexiglass. Alan Lyman from Lyman Signs did this job with my help at a cost of $150. That amount was jointly paid by the Women's Auxiliary to the Fire Department, the Firemen's Association, and the Warwick Women's Guild. Fire in the steeple in 1986, light by a lightning hit, and that was replaced with the fiberglass steeple in 1987. A complete repair of the clock was accomplished in 2007-2008 because of a part that broke on the chime side. The town appropriated from the stabilization fund. The total cost came to $6,660.
The builder was a gentleman named Chapin Holden. The style he used was something called the Greek Revival style.
1836, Unitarian Church, designed, constructed by local builders, and when we look at the building, the exterior appearance of it is what we would call Greek Revival architecture. Look at the front facade, sort of the primary face of the church. We look at the center pavilion where the entry points are. We have these 2 beautiful frontispieces, so set within them, recessed, pit-paneled door. Then it's surrounded and flanked by this typical Greek Revival frontispiece. And what I mean by that is we look and we have these pilasters to either side of the entry, and they're ornamented and detailed with like a palmetto leaf on those. Then we look at the entablature up above, and it's fully articulated. A triple fascia architrave to it, nice frieze board, and then a beautiful sort of proportioned cornice. But we look elsewhere too. If you look up above at the tower, we have a parapet there, and at the corners of the parapet too, we have these Greek details that sort of embellish the corners, Enthymeian leaves and Enthymeian ornament there. We have just this beautiful composition, and then we see above the 2 frontises these Gothic arched window openings. It's not something we generally associate the Gothic arch with Grecian architecture, but we do associate it with houses of worship and other people who just casually passing by a building in the 1830s and would see that either up close or from a distance, kind of immediately identifies this structure as a house of worship. So those are a few of the elements and details that define this structure as a Greek Revival building. We're in one large open room. There are no secondary supports inside of this space. How do you achieve something like that? That's the engineering that's above our head, right?
In sort of normal engineering terms, it was referred to as a king post truss. There are numerous materials. They're all wood, some oak, some pine, some hemlock, rendered in different ways. The very long pieces, the largest pieces were hewn, and the shorter pieces were sawn. There are a number of pieces of wood in the attic that are clearly had been meant for other buildings. Our frugal housewright was able to utilize a number of different pieces of timber in the attic and make them work very satisfactorily. Although as you look at them, one is from clearly a king post system, 18 inches above where it joins the cross timber. There are two shoulders, and those two shoulders in a classic truss, king post truss system would have had struts. The other two timbers that are further back don't have any of that sort of stuff. They do have mortises, and mortises that are not being used. In terms of the windows, there were a couple of functions. Obviously, one was lighting. The other one was air circulation. There are additional slots in the tracks in which the windows move that allow windows to be opened 12 inches, and you had permanent opening for at least the time of the meeting or whatever was happening. The other thing that we've also noticed is that in the choir loft area, there are also these sort of alterations that have been made that allow the windows to open, and I think that there are two casements up there which were done to increase the amount of airflow.
We have 8 window openings filled with triple hung sash. There are 45 panes of glass in each of the openings. That's a total of 360 panes of glass, 10 by 12 panes that allow light into the sanctuary here. And the ability to have a space like this flooded with natural light really relied on these large window openings we see on both of the side elevations of the church. As we work our way on the inside of the church, when we start to look at small details, things like molding profiles and hardware, you look at the molding profiles and they're what we would describe as Grecian ogies. We look at the hardware, a variety of different Norfolk latches. You look at the latches on the main doors, a higher quality of finish and design of a latch. As we walk into the building, into sort of the entry vestibule, we have these cast iron versions of the Norfolk, exactly what you'd expect to see in the 1830s. So an early plan of the church shows that in the entry, as soon as you walked in, there would have been a pair of stoves located essentially to either side of the doors into the sanctuary. Stove pipes ran through the wall and then across the sanctuary to the rear wall of it, where there's a pair of chimneys located. So you would have received, a bit of residual heat off of stovepipes and a heated entry foyer.
My family moved to town in 1956 when I was 14. I started to attend the church to be with newly made friends from the Shepperson, Witherell, and Hubbard family. In the 1950s and 60s, the Trinitarian Congregational Church and the Unitarian Church were federated. So we went to the Congregational Church in the winter and to the Unitarian Church in the summer. Hetty Bell and Fred Lincoln's daughter, Patricia Johnson, who grew up in town, told me that no kid had a wristwatch or a cell phone, and when the clock struck 5 p.m., it was time to head home for supper. If you went out to play after supper, it was curfew time when the clock struck 9 p.m. I was appointed caretaker of the town clock in 1968. The weights must be wound once a week, and I held that job for the next 50 years. The original clock probably had gold leaf numerals, but these faded over time. For the town's bicentennial in 1963, the numerals were painted with gold paint, but that too did not last long. In 1971, Arline Lincoln of Lyman Signs and I relettered the numerals, hands, and minute marks using gold-colored plexiglass. To this day, the clock remains very readable. Lightning struck the steeple in 1986 and it burned, but the building was saved. The steeple was built in 1987 with fiberglass. I have attended many funerals as well as many weddings here, and I also served as limousine driver for 2 of these weddings because I always had a large 4-door sedan. Many children's Christmas parties and Memorial Day services have been held in this building. As I think about it, I have been associated with this building since I came to Warwick 67 years ago. The First Parish is no longer affiliated with the Unitarian Association, but this meeting house building, which houses the town clock and so many wonderful memories, should remain as a cherished landmark here in Warwick. I hope the town will plan for the long term and find a use for this building going forward. It is truly an amazing place.
Just a moment now, while we set up for the second part of the program. Quick apologies to Shane and to everybody here. We didn't get the room as dark as we had hoped. And I will say, if there are other times when it's being shown and on YouTube, a lot of the details which were referred to by Eric and myself would make a lot more sense if you could actually see them. But and if there are questions about some of that stuff, feel free to ask. Arline, if you would. I put you right there. You're welcome.
Can I have the microphone for you guys really quick?
I think have pickups there. We have checked. So the second part of the program is now, and a lot of it is up to you guys because we have all been through this. George, please.
Before we begin, let me say that the gentleman that was speaking at the end of this didn't look so hot. But keep in mind that if he had lived to be the same age, Clark Gable probably would have looked like that too.
All right, George.
George.
The other thing I want to say, I got a couple more things to say later, but this raising of this church in 1836 was like a barn raising. And there was some discussion of whether or not they would find enough volunteer help with the job if it was a dry raising versus a wet raising. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about.
You brought your cup, Carol, I can see, so you were expecting the wet raising. Sorry to disappoint you.
So what was it?
Yeah, what was it?
Dry.
It was dry.
The contractor, Chapin Holden, insisted that it be dry, and it was. That building was erected in 2 days, September 8th and September 9th, without anybody getting hurt. And then after it was completed, they all went down to the Warwick Inn for a banquet.
And actually, a wet raising was fairly rare. If they knew that at the end of the day's work or the actual assembly raising of the building, that there was going to be a celebration, then that was often enough. But it's a point that was made. And Chapin Holden, who was a very accomplished builder, knew exactly what he was doing. So, now, Arline, do you have anything? And I'm not putting you on the spot. You're here to answer questions or...
Okay.
And you can do that. And George, are you set?
Yeah, I do have a couple more things to say, but I'll let somebody else go first.
Yeah. Questions from anybody?
There was one detail that surprised me. I came in a little late. It might have been addressed earlier. Talked about the steeple being hit by lightning, and then you said the steeple is fiberglass from the 80s?
No,
Yes, the steeple
it
is.
Yes.
Yes, the steeple
Yes.
is fiberglass, cast fiberglass.
So the steeple came down entirely and was replaced in the 1980s. I never realized that.
yeah,
Burned
That's right.
in 1986, right, George?
Right.
And was replaced the next
replaced
year.
in 1987.
I did not realize that. Thank you.
My husband did, had, actually, he found a place that had a steeple in Texas. And we had it shipped from Texas, and when it came, it was on our front lawn until they got it up into the church.
David?
So for the record,
Wait a minute.
George is so modest. He also happened to be fire chief on that burning steeple.
Right. You remember it?
Fire chief.
27.
I remember that day. So we had been trained to get water out of a truck at the sawmill, and so showed up. And George looked at me and said, "Not a good training day." A lot of tension.
Now, was there equipment that came up from Orange because it was...
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I can describe it, but the old steeple, halfway up the steeple, there was some cross membrane. 2x4s, crisscross, kind of solid. We could get the hose up to the bottom of the steeple, and we tried to get the water up beyond that cross bracing, and it wouldn't go. We tried and tried, and we couldn't get the fire out in the top of the steeple. So I finally had to call the orange ladder truck up here, and they got up to the steeple and chopped the hole in the top, and then put the fire out. Now the lightning hit, came down the steeple, it came down the cables that run the clock, you know, the weights. It jumped to a metal coat rack that was in the lobby, and it went across under the carpet and then grounded out on the ductwork of the furnace. And that's what saved the building. That lightning strike shorted out or crashed out by hitting the ductwork on the furnace.
The only place it damaged inside the building was where it came down by the coat rack, and there was a hole there
In the carpet.
in
yeah.
the carpeting. It's still there.
Again, if people come up to the church tomorrow, these things, yeah, we can point out where they were. They have since been repaired and the carpet covers it. So,
One other thing that I can say about Patricia Johnson's mentioning about the 5 o'clock and the 9 o'clock probably brings back memories for Bruce and Nancy when they used to sound the fire horn in Orange and in Athol at 9 o'clock. That was for curfew time in Orange and Athol at 9 o'clock.
I remember the fire alarm too. We were sitting in the station. What? I remember the fire well too, at the steeple. Brian Gale and his Rick, who worked for him, and myself, we were sitting there waiting out the storm, and yeah, okay, we'll go back to work. And we drove through the smoke and thought it was fog, and turned around quickly and came back and got trucks.
there are some things that didn't come through particularly clearly this afternoon in the video that I'll just speak to very quickly. One has to do with our builder, Chapin Holden. And a couple of interesting things about him. Chapin Holden was born in Northfield. And he was a contemporary of the Stearns brothers. I'm assuming that some people here know who they are. They were very competent builders. One in particular, Calvin, I believe, had gone to Boston and worked with Asher Benjamin and some very sophisticated builders of the time, and then had come back. And it's our belief, we haven't been able to connect it, that Chapin Holden possibly worked on one of their crews, was certainly aware of what was going on, the number of builders in Northfield, and the quality of construction there is pretty incredible, and a lot of it is clearly visible today, still existent. Another quick item was Chapin Holden, again, our builder, and I think, George, I'll check with you, for I believe it was $101 paid for the removal of the meeting house, the second meeting house.
That was across the street from
Right.
this one.
Right across the street. And the reason that this is important, particularly in that dark frame that you were sort of looking at timbers, our belief is that a lot of the timbers that went into the building across the street ultimately came from the second meeting house. And it's pretty cool. It was pointed out by a fellow named Wayne Perry, who was pretty early on in the project and spent time there looking at and telling us about what was going on.
Okay, now, the focus is on the building, but Arline was kind enough to give me 4 or 5, 6 books like this that are minutes of meetings of a lot of their meetings over the years. And I've picked up a couple of interesting tidbits from these minutes. You know, the First Parish and Religious Society was very instrumental in the well-being of this community. Most of the people did go to church there. Yeah, there was a Congregational church and the Baptist church, but for the most part, people were associated with the Unitarian Church. Over the years, there was some generous donations to the First Parish and Religious Society. There was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Hazeltine, who was a doctor in the early 1800s. In 1878, a Paul Hazeltine, which I think is probably his son, was living in Maine. And that's where Dr. Benjamin had moved to. Dr. Benjamin Hazeltine had moved to Maine. He donated $7,000 to the First Parish Religious Society. It was to be invested. Half of the interest would be used to support the preaching, and the other half was supposed to be used to help the needy in town. And in these books, I've seen names of families that were helped, that were needy at the time, by the generosity of the First Parish and Religious Society. There was a lot of other donations through the years. The Wheelocks, Sibley, Clapp, I could go on and on. And I'm not kidding. It's right here in the book. In 1879, the First Parish and Religious Society gave a loan to the town of Warwick for $5,000 to run the town business. The town eventually paid it back in 2 or 3 years, but the First Parish and Religious Society was a banker. They loaned the town $5,000.
It took quite a bit of doing to get all of the records from all the different people that were officers in the church. And this summer, George and I managed to get them from this person and that person, and they were all over town. Everybody had different records of the church. But we got them all together and we went through every single little piece of paper that was there. We spent a lot of time doing that this summer.
Charlie Morse used some of these books to look for references for his history that he wrote in 1963. And these bookmarks, they were his bookmarks.
Yeah.
I could tell by he used information from these records just like I'm using.
Question back here, Jeanette?
Where are those
Here,
books?
wait a minute, would you just take note? We need it.
Where are those books going to stay now? Collect them all.
Hopefully, they're going to wind up in the Historic Society if they ever have a place for them. They just don't have a place for all those records now.
Is there like a big stack?
There's quite a few. George's,
Well, this right here, there's probably 7 or 8 of them. These are records of the minutes of their meetings. Some of the other records are records of the treasurer. And I don't know how many of them there are, records of the treasurer.
quite a few, and there are also the, one of the records that I have in my home, which shouldn't be there, is every person that ever belonged to the parish. And I was the last person in that book. That's why I'm here now and why I care so much about my church, because I'm it. There's a difference in the Unitarian Church and the parish. They were 2 different entities. The Unitarians withdrew all the funds that they had invested and told us we could use the building as we wished. So.
I'd just like to remind folks that the purpose of the microphone isn't just to be heard, but it's so your voice can be documented for the video. So even if you think your voice carries the room, please be patient enough to use the microphone so it feeds into the document.
Doc, go ahead.
Wait a minute.
Oh, hold on. Come on, Claire.
Hey, I'm just wondering what's going to be happening with the church now that people are not upping again to be members.
My hope for the church is that it will remain a religious society. I'm hoping it doesn't wind up as an antique shop or something that it should, I'm proud of that church. I've gone to it for 80 years. I'm 91 years old, and I went to it when we first came to Warwick. I was raised a Catholic, but there were no other churches, so my mother felt it best I go there. And we had a wonderful religious programs through the 40s and the 50s. We had the AUI, and there were practically every child in town belonged to the church at one time or another. And it just, I'm hoping that it will remain somewhat of a something religious society.
Clyde?
I noticed in the video there, I was watching it, and I was very, very impressed by the shot of the drone of the church itself, and what a beautiful setting it was with the trees and so forth around it, and how beautiful it looked. And I'm wondering if there's any plans to reproduce that in some fashion to a still photo or something for whatever uses that we might find, as a fundraising thing or whatever. And I also was impressed by the fact of the shot there of it when there was hardly any foliage around it, where the trees were cut, taken at a different time, and those two put together in some kind of a fashion to show the progress or degress and the changes and so forth. And I thought that might be some way to raise funds for the building itself.
Good idea. I don't know if anybody noticed it, but there is pictures in the Historical Society. Some of the photos that were shown, that were taken from the Historical Society, show Mount Grace bare.
Right.
A field up there with cows in it.
But also, one picture had the weather vane on top, and that's disappeared.
Yeah.
Along with a lot of other possessions of the church have disappeared through the years.
I just have a question to the audience. I'm wondering how many of you here have attended a wedding or a funeral at the church or a program. A show of hands. It would be nice to see if most, okay, so a good majority, so hands down, or a Memorial Day program, right? So hands up if you've never stepped inside the church. So tomorrow's your chance.
Okay.
Okay, play.
No.
And then I just want to ask about repairs to the church, because I noticed it needs a paint job. And how are you?
That's obvious that the church needs some repairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty obvious. Now, on tomorrow, I'm willing to unlock the front door for the church if anybody wants to come in and look around. But I think 2 to 4 is kind of pushing it. I think if we set it like at 1 and maybe have it for a half an hour to an hour, I think 2 hours is too long.
Because the Corrugata is at 2:30, correct?
Right.
The
Corrugata.
cardboard boat race
Yeah,
is
the-
at 2:30. So I love that idea.
1 o'clock. I'll be there at 1 o'clock for anybody that's interested in looking inside. Now, I will say this. You'll only get permission to go into the foyer in the sanctuary. You can't go downstairs in the vestry and in the furnace room. It's just
Too
not
dangerous.
good to have people going down the steep steps and
They're
getting
very
there. So
very
just the
steep.
sanctuary where the chandelier is and the pews, that's all that'll be available to be seen.
And I will just add to that the good money has it that what you will be able to see tomorrow will take your breath away. It'll be a special experience. Going downstairs, they're all fun. In terms of what Clyde was saying about future projects, something that Shane and I have been continually passing back and forth is we keep talking about, maybe we'll be able to do a really serious architectural study of this building. or a framing study, or any one of a number of things. And I think some of what Clyde was talking about, possibly something just to raise the presence of that building, not only for our community, but surrounding communities. In terms of, oh, well, there's this deserted church. Yeah, big deal. Well, it kind of is a big deal, and I will, again, just go along with George, and I think 1 o'clock's great. I was not wedded to anything earlier. If you've got the time and can come and haven't been there for a while, or maybe have never been there, it'll be worth it.
There may be grants out there to help.
Well, that's all kind of in the works. And I'm
hopefully-
looking, as I say this, I'm looking at David, who's sort of looking at no one.
David.
No, the selectmen are well aware of some of the issues the church has, some of the issues that you guys have been dealing with,
Right.
and we have to get through those. And I'm not even going to bother going there right now, but there's an awareness of it, and our hope is that this presentation, and maybe other people that get to see this, will realize there is something special. As George closed, this is a special building, and it is. So I'm gonna push people, if I can, just to go up and take a look at it if you haven't.
Can you tell us anything about the organ? Is it still serviceable?
It needs repairs that would cost way up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It is playable, but a lot of the keys stick and all kinds of ciphers, and it needs repairs, and it's a shame to let it go the way it is.
Yeah, I have one question, probably for George. I've been in the church down cellar when the boiler room was running for wood heat for the Christmas party for the kids. Is there no way to get a view downstairs of that, or?
Well,
I'd rather not.
no. The furnace was, it's partially dismantled. The plumbing around the furnace has all been taken. The only thing that's left there is the firebox. So,
The old furnace.
Huh?
The old
You
furnace.
know, wood furnace.
There is a new oil
There is a
furnace
new oil
in the
furnace
building.
in the basement.
We had oil furnace.
There's
put
an oil
in.
furnace there.
Yes,
That was put in when I was fire chief,
yes.
the oil furnace.
Can I ask how structurally it is underneath? I mean, the underpinning?
The underpinning needs a little work.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
Okay.
To say the least.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, my name is Doc Prine, and I live the first house on the left on Hastings Pond Road, and I think we're the only family in town that has a view of the church. And looking out our kitchen window, it is really playing what the values of the town are, because there's the Fellows Memorial, and there's the American flag hanging there, and beyond that, there's the church. And that kind of keeps me reminded of the values of the town, I think. But anyways, yeah, thank you.
You know,
I think, Doc, yeah, George
there
has-
was, over the years, there was some bell ringing pranks. Does anybody want to hear about them?
To
Of
say
course.
the least. To say the least.
Right across the street from the church, there used to be a flagpole. It was the
Mayo Stevens.
Maria
Mayo Stevens.
Stevens
Flagpole.
Memorial Flagpole.
Yes.
She donated it to the town and was put up there. Well, as I understand it, kids used to get in there and they'd go up into the steeple with a piece of wire and they'd throw it down. And then they would run across the street and they would run it up the flagpole to the top. And then they could come out and the wire was hooked to the clapper on the bell. And then they could run out of the woods behind the school and ring the bell. They weren't in the church doing it, because they knew if they were in the church doing it, they would get caught. But that's small potatoes from this one. One of the owners of where Doc lives, Don Davidson, and this was back before I came to town, but Charlie Lincoln and Betsy told me this story. Don Davidson took a long spool of wire and he got up into the church steeple. You know, back in those days, they didn't lock the door. It was like anything else in town, and nothing was ever locked. But he got up in the steeple and he tied this wire around the clapper. And he run it over through the trees going over towards the original fire station, up along Hazen's Pond Road, through some trees, right to the front porch of where Doc's house is. And on Old Home Day, when they had a dance here, he would wait until the band stopped playing for intermission, and he would sit there on the porch and ring the bell. And he used to laugh because the guys would be going up to the church. He'd watch them running around inside with flashlights looking for somebody that was ringing the bell. They couldn't find anybody. They'd come back down to the dance. And then the next intermission, he'd start doing it again. And to this day, if you go up and look at the clapper is wrapped around with that end of that wire, spool of wire. It's still there.
I think I'll add to that, Doc. Don't get any ideas.
I was thinking.
Even in the 60s, people went up and rang the church bells. I wouldn't want to tell any stories about any members of my family, but when Calvin and I got married, August 13th, 1960, my mother laid down the law. She did not want to hear the church bells ringing in town. So I don't know when my family would possibly ring them.
The church used to be open all the time, but it was broken into many times, and we had trouble with some young people through the years, smashing windows and things, especially downstairs.
Well, have we had questions from everyone? I mean, there are probably many. I will just say, again, tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. George will be there. I may very well be there, too.
I'll be there at 1.
Yeah, 1 to 2. So I'm going to close the meeting unless anybody has anything they want to add. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.